Let's read the graphic novel about Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Women's Rights Pioneer by Connie Colwell Miller, illustrated by Cynthia Martin. I recommend it. Chapter 1, An Independent Girl. In 1826, Elizabeth Cady was 11 years old. At that time, women had few rights under the law. They couldn't vote, own land, go to college, or hold professional jobs such as doctors or lawyers. Father, why can't women vote?
Because the law says so.
How can we change the laws?
Only men who are lawmakers can do that.
That's not fair. That year, Elizabeth's brother, Eleazar, died. He was only 20 years old.
What would I do without my only son? Oh, my daughter, I wish you were a boy.
I will try to be all my brother was. At age 15, Elizabeth finished school. She earned grades as high as any boy in her class. Father, I want to go to college like Eleazar did.
Women don't go to college. You should learn to keep house, cook, and care for children.
I want to do more. I want to read books and learn about the world.
School's fine when you were a girl, but now you must be a proper young lady.
Later, Daniel allowed Elizabeth to attend the Troy Female Seminary. It was one of the few schools where girls could continue their education. After Elizabeth graduated from Troy, she often visited her cousin Jarrett Smith.
It is unfair for one man to own another man.
Many African Americans were owned as slaves. Smith was an abolitionist who worked to free slaves. Slaves have no rights under the law. They cannot even vote. Women also have no legal rights, but that doesn't seem to bother these men, thought Elizabeth. In 1839, Elizabeth met abolitionist lawyer named Henry Stanton. Henry and Elizabeth fell in love and planned to marry.
Abolitionists don't make enough money to support a family.
That's what Elizabeth's dad said. He is a brave man fighting to free the slaves.
I forbid you to marry him.
I love you, Henry, but my father isn't ready for me to marry.
But I'm going to the World Anti-Slavery Convention in London, England. I will be gone at least 8 months.
I can't bear to be away from you that long. I'll marry you. Father will just have to understand. Henry and Elizabeth married in May 1840. Soon after the wedding, they sailed to London. Before the convention, Henry and Elizabeth met with other abolitionists in London. One of these people was Lucretia Mott. We must convince the world how unfair it is for one person to own another. I could speak in front of groups of people just like Lucretia does. When Elizabeth and Lucretia arrived at the convention, they and the other women were forced to sit behind a curtain.
Slaves deserve the same rights as all other men.
When we get back to America, you and I will work together for women's rights. I can't believe these men are ignoring rights for women. A wife and a mother. In 1847, the Stantons moved to Seneca Falls, New York. Henry traveled often on business. Elizabeth stayed at home with their growing family. I love my children, but I miss my friends. I long to talk with an adult, thought Elizabeth. A year later, she saw her friend Lucretia Mott. They met with several other women to talk about women's rights. I now understand how badly women need more rights.
How true. Women aren't allowed to own property.
And most colleges and professions are closed to us. People think women are only able to cook and clean and care for children. It's up to us to change the rules.
Why not call a convention now? We have waited long enough.
Elizabeth and her friends planned a women's rights convention in Seneca Falls. Let's add that women should be allowed to vote.
But Lizzie, you'll make us look ridiculous.
Elizabeth wrote down all the rights that the group believed women should have. They called the list the Declaration of Sentiments. Voting is the most important right of all. How can women be equal to men if we can't help make the laws that govern us? On July 19th, 1848, about 300 people met in the Wesleyan Chapel in Seneca Falls for the convention. There, Elizabeth read the Declaration of Sentiments.
We now demand our right to vote according to the declaration under which we live.
The right is ours. Have it we must, use it we will. Say that together. Have it we must, use it we will. Have it we must, use it we will. Mrs. Stanton believes women should vote. She's a good person, but she's gone too far this time. Elizabeth won her first victory in 1848. The state of New York passed a law that allowed married women to own property. Elizabeth hoped to continue writing and delivering speeches for women's rights, but her plans were interrupted when she had 2 more babies. I wish I had more time for writing.
I'm telling Mama.
That's mine!
No, it's mine.
In 1851, Elizabeth's friend Amelia Bloomer introduced her to Susan B. Anthony. All 3 women were interested in women's rights. Elizabeth, I'd like you to meet Susan Anthony.
I would like that.
Miss Anthony, I saw you earlier at the abolitionist meeting. We must get together soon. Elizabeth and Susan quickly became good friends. We would make great partners in the fight for women's rights, Susan.
That's right. That's true. You write such wonderful speeches. I can't wait to share your words with everyone.
But I have no one to take care of the children while I travel. We'll have to wait until they're older. Over the next few years, Elizabeth had 2 more children. She waited until her children had gone to bed to write letters and speeches. Susan, I have great plans for the year 1860. My mother will take care of the children while I travel.
I'm so glad to hear your news. The suffrage movement needs you.
Women shall vote. By 1861, Americans were fighting the Civil War. Slavery was one of the causes of the war. People in southern states wanted slavery to expand into new states. Northerners were against the spread of slavery. At first, Elizabeth spoke about rights for both slaves and women. Think about the wrong done to that one lone friendless slave who was stolen from his African hut and given to the American slaver. In 1865, the North won the war. The 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution freed all slaves. Elizabeth believed women would receive the same rights as the freed slaves. But the amendment did not include rights for women.
We still have work to do. Slaves deserve the same rights as other Americans.
What about women? When will we enjoy these rights?
We can only fight one battle at a time, Miss Stanton.
Elizabeth and Susan worked to change the laws that applied to women. We have 10,000 signatures here. All these people agree that women should have the right to vote.
You can't be serious. We're not interested in your petitions. We're trying to put a divided country back together.
But nothing stopped Elizabeth and Susan from working for women's suffrage. In July 1867, they traveled to Kansas. I'm so happy that Kansas is considering giving women the vote.
Yes, we have a great opportunity. We must not waste it.
Elizabeth and Susan traveled separately across Kansas for 3 months. Each one stopped in 2 or 3 places every day to speak to groups about suffrage. I look forward to the time when all men and women, black and white, shall stand equal before the law. Sometimes Elizabeth and Susan traveled together. They spoke to crowds, large and small. The civilized world awaits your action to see if the principles of our fathers are possible in government. In November, Kansas voted on suffrage for women and African Americans. Neither law passed. I'm disappointed, but we'll just have to work even harder.
You're right. Kansas was the first state to vote on women's suffrage, but it won't be the last.
Kansas votes no. In 1868, the 14th Amendment passed. This law said all men born in the United States had the right to vote. What about rights for women?
This time belongs to the freed slaves. The time for women will come.
My question is, do you believe the African race is composed entirely of males? Some southern states still tried to keep African American men from voting. Lawmakers then proposed the 15th Amendment. It said the right to vote couldn't be based on a person's skin color, but it said nothing about a person's gender. Mrs. Stanton, I can't believe that you are against this law.
The idea behind the amendment is good, but women need the right to vote just as much as freed slaves did.
Many people were angry with Elizabeth for opposing the 15th Amendment. In 1869, the women's suffrage movement split over these differences. Elizabeth led one group. Lucy Stone led the other. The 15th Amendment is a great step towards equal rights for all people.
Yes, Lucy, but what about women? Don't we deserve the same rights?
Of course, but all things take time.
If we don't demand our rights now, they will keep passing us by.
Elizabeth and Susan later wrote their own amendment to the Constitution. They gathered signatures of people who agreed with their ideas. They brought the signatures to the U.S. Senate. Ladies, when will you accept that men are better at making decisions than women?
I will never accept it.
As Elizabeth got older, many people thought her views became more extreme. Sometimes even Susan disagreed with her. You see, suffrage only. What about other ways women are mistreated? The law says men can hurt their wives or take their children from them.
Stick to the issue. Stick to the vote.
In 1888, Susan and Elizabeth held the International Council of Women. People from 8 countries discussed women's rights at the meeting. President Grover Cleveland even invited the group to the White House to celebrate. Just look how far we've come. Some states now allow women to own property, and many women have better jobs.
We've made progress, Susan, but there's still so much left to do.
At age 76, Elizabeth gave her last major speech. She spoke to the U.S. Senate Committee on Women Suffrage. Nothing strengthens the judgment and quickens the conscience like individual responsibility. The responsibilities of life rest equally on man and woman. After her speech, Elizabeth spoke to Senator Zebulon Vance of North Carolina.
Miss Stanton, if your logic supported any other proposed law, it couldn't help but pass.
If you really mean what you say, Senator, you'd support giving women the vote. Elizabeth's legacy. In 1895, many people joined Elizabeth's family and friends in celebrating her 80th birthday at the Metropolitan Opera House in New York City. I declare November 12th to be Stanton Day in the city of New York. Hooray! Congratulations! 3 cheers for Elizabeth. Even at age 80, nearly blind, Elizabeth continued to work for women's rights. She wrote books and articles that supported her cause. Elizabeth died October 26, 1902, at age 86. No one was more upset by her death than Susan. Any comment, Miss Anthony?
I am too crushed to say much. I already feel lonesome without her.
After Elizabeth died, Elizabeth's daughter Harriet and granddaughter Nora continued the work for women's suffrage. Other women also joined the fight. Suffrage now! Votes for women! In 1920, the 19th Amendment passed. This law, which was written by Susan and Elizabeth in the 1870s, gave women the right to vote. Nora, I wish your grandmother was here.
This day would have been the happiest of her life.
Even though Elizabeth didn't live to see the 19th Amendment, her passion, her speeches, and her writings all helped pave the way for this important law. The end.